There is a number that should terrify you, not because it's large, because it's small. 1. 1 degree of temperature difference, 1 miscommunicated order, 1 phone call that almost didn't happen. That's the margin between the world you woke up in this morning and a version of Earth where humans simply don't exist anymore. We like to think extinction is something that happens to other species. Dinosaurs, mammoths, things that didn't see it coming. But the truth is, humanity has stood at the edge of its own grave multiple times. And in almost every case, it wasn't an asteroid that nearly pushed us in. It was us, our mistakes, our weapons, our spectacular, almost incomprehensible ability to nearly destroy the one thing we were supposed to protect: ourselves. These are the times we came dangerously close to extinction, and some of them happened in your lifetime. Let's start in 1918, because most people think of World War I when they hear that year. The trenches, the gas attacks, the mud. But while the war was killing millions, something else was quietly boarding ships, crossing borders, and slipping through every defense humanity had: the Spanish flu. And calling it a flu is like calling a nuclear bomb a firecracker. Within 2 years, the Spanish flu infected an estimated 500 million people, roughly 1/3 of the entire human population on Earth at the time. Between 50 and 100 million people died. To put that in perspective, World War I, one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, killed around 20 million. The flu killed up to 5 times more. In some villages in Alaska and the Pacific Islands, it wiped out entire communities. Not most of the people, everyone. Some researchers believe that if the virus had been even slightly more lethal, or if it had mutated one more time in a particular direction, we wouldn't be here to study it. The Spanish flu didn't just kill people, it nearly unraveled civilization itself. Supply chains collapsed, governments stopped functioning, and in some cities, there weren't enough living people left to bury the dead. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. We didn't stop it. It stopped itself. Now let's talk about the moment a single Soviet military officer saved your life without ever knowing your name. It's September 26, 1983. The Cold War is at one of its tensest points in decades. A Soviet early warning system, a satellite network designed to detect incoming American nuclear missiles, suddenly screams to life. The alarm is unmistakable. According to the system, the United States has just launched 5 nuclear missiles toward the Soviet Union. The man staring at the screen is Stanislav Petrov, a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces. Protocol is clear. If the system says missiles are incoming, you report it up the chain of command. The generals decide. The missiles launch. Mutual assured destruction. Everyone dies. But Petrov hesitates. Something feels wrong. 5 missiles? If America was going to start a nuclear war, why only 5? A real first strike would be hundreds, thousands. He decides, against every rule, against every protocol, against the direct orders of the system he was trained to trust, that it's a false alarm. He was right. A rare alignment of sunlight and clouds had fooled the satellite into detecting launches that never happened. If Petrov had followed protocol, Soviet missiles would have been in the air within minutes. America would have responded, and within hours, nuclear warheads would have been detonating across every major city on Earth. Scientists estimate a full nuclear exchange between the U.S. and the Soviet Union in 1983 would have triggered a nuclear winter, blocking out the sun, collapsing global food systems, and potentially killing every human being on the planet within a decade. One man, one hesitation. That's what stands between you and nothing. But Petrov isn't even the closest call we had that year. Because 2 months later, in November 1983, NATO ran a military exercise called Operation Able Archer, a simulation of a nuclear attack on the Soviet Union so realistic that Soviet intelligence became convinced it was the real thing. Soviet nuclear forces were placed on their highest alert. Bombers were armed, launch sequences were prepared, and for several days, the world teetered on the edge of nuclear war, not because of an actual conflict, but because of a war game that looked too convincing. Declassified documents later revealed that the KGB had sent urgent warnings to Moscow that the West was about to strike. Some Soviet commanders were certain the end was coming. The only reason it didn't was that a handful of people on both sides chose to wait rather than act. That's it. Patience. That's what saved the human race in November 1983. Now here's one most people have never heard of, and it might be the closest we've ever actually come. October 27th, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis is at its absolute peak. An American destroyer, the USS Beale, has located a Soviet submarine, B-59, deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean and begins dropping signaling depth charges to force it to surface. What the Americans don't know is that B-59 has been out of radio contact for days. The crew has no idea whether nuclear war has already started. The submarine is equipped with a nuclear torpedo, and it has authorization to use it. Inside B-59, the conditions are catastrophic. The temperature has reached over 40 degrees Celsius. Carbon dioxide is building up. The crew is exhausted, disoriented, and terrified. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, becomes convinced that World War III has already begun and orders the nuclear torpedo to be armed and prepared for launch. A nuclear torpedo detonated in the Atlantic in 1962 would have triggered immediate retaliation, which would have triggered a response. Within days, every nuclear weapon on Earth would have been in the air. But Soviet submarines required agreement from 3 officers to launch. 2 said yes, 1 said no. His name was Vasili Arkhipov. He calmly argued that they should surface and make contact before firing. After a tense confrontation, Savitsky stood down. 1 man said no. 1 man. And because of that, you exist. Let's come back to something slower and perhaps even more frightening. Because not every near-extinction event comes with a countdown clock and a red button. In the 1970s and 80s, scientists began noticing something deeply wrong with the ozone layer, the thin atmospheric shield that protects all life on Earth from the sun's ultraviolet radiation. Above Antarctica, there was a hole, and it was growing. The culprit was chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, chemicals used in refrigerators, aerosol sprays, and air conditioning systems that had been pumping into the atmosphere for decades. Without the ozone layer, UV radiation would increase to levels that would damage DNA, collapse food chains, and make large parts of the planet's surface essentially uninhabitable. Some models suggested that if CFC production had continued unchecked for another few decades, the damage could have become irreversible. In 1987, the world did something it almost never does. It cooperated. The Montreal Protocol was signed by every nation on Earth, the first universally ratified treaty in United Nations history, and CFC production was phased out globally. The ozone layer has been slowly recovering ever since. Scientists estimate it will be fully healed by around 2060. We saw the cliff. We stopped. Barely. And that's the through line in every single one of these stories. The Spanish flu that stopped itself. The Soviet officer who trusted his gut. The submarine commander who said no. The world that signed a treaty just in time. In every case, the margin was razor thin. In every case, the outcome hinged on something almost absurdly small. Which means the question isn't really whether humanity will face moments like these again. It will. The question is whether we'll be lucky enough or wise enough to have another Petrov, another Arkhipov, another last-minute treaty signed by enough people who still cared. Because here's the thing about extinction. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It arrives quietly, in the form of a miscalculation, a misread alarm, a virus on a ship, a hole in the sky that nobody noticed until it was almost too late. We came dangerously close, more times than most people will ever know. And the only reason you're watching this right now is because, just barely, we didn't.